Sable Verrett swore that if she had to listen to one more lecture about the magnificent intricacies of human culture, she would find a way to psychically implode every single alien brain in the room. Easier said than done, of course, given her talents weren't exactly the kind that got you a promotion in the Psychic Soldier Handbook. But a girl could dream. The Interstellar Museum was a floating cathedral of greed, a glittering monument to everything the Athicans cherished, which was basically every culture they could pillage without breaking a sweat. Their latest acquisition, one human colony slightly used same-day delivery. Notice how the humans built their structures with such inefficient materials, droned an Athican curator, voice smoother than a command's handshake. Wood. Stone quaint. Sable stifled a yawn. Quaint was just another word for outdated, much like her patience. She was supposed to be here to assess the threat, not nod off to the sound of 1,000 condescending lectures. The curator, an ungodly blend of tentacles and arrogance, glided past a display case containing what looked suspiciously like her old toaster. Exhibit B, Humanity's Penchant for Impracticality. "I didn't know you guys were into antiques," Sable said, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown a star. "I hear they're back in style on Earth." The tentacled wonder turned a bulbous eye toward her, amusement as false as the teeth in its maw. "Your people are fascinating in their simplicity." "Thanks. I also bake cookies on Saturdays," she shot back. "What's next? Got any 20th century pop culture memorabilia I can cringe at?" The Athican ignored her. Of course it did. The universe was full of things that ignored humans, and Sable was pretty sure she was its undisputed queen. The real reason she was here nestled like a turd in the middle of a birthday cake. The Athicans had a plan, and it wasn't to open a theme park. They were using the human colony as a decoy, a bait-and switch to make the other galactic powers think twice before throwing their weight around. A snare set with human lives. "I assume you're aware of your colony's precarious situation?" the curator asked. It was as if it found the whole thing mildly amusing, like watching a cat toy with a cornered mouse. "Oh, believe me, I know," Sable replied. "It's like being the one sober person at a party of idiots." She could feel the pressure building at the back of her head, the familiar tingle of her psychic abilities aching to be let loose. But that was the thing with power. It was best served cold, preferably with a side of revenge. As they moved further into the museum's bowels, the air grew thick with the stench of polished metal and old secrets. Sable's eyes flickered over the exhibits, pieces of a culture she was tasked to protect, pieces that belonged back on Earth, not as trophies for alien glory. And here, the curator pointed to a rectangular box that had Old Earth TV scrawled on a plaque below, "is a curious item from your past." "Ah, yes," Sable nodded, feigning interest. "The device that subjected millions to hours of mind-numbing entertainment." "A significant cultural achievement, truly," the curator chuckled, a sound like gravel sliding down a hill. "Your sarcasm is as noted as your bravery." "Sarcasm's easier than bravery," Sable replied with a smirk. "Keeps the mind sharp and the enemies confused." They walked past rows of similar curiosities, each more banal than the last. And through it all, she could sense the tension simmering beneath the surface, the quiet hum of a storm waiting to break. Aliens had a way of underestimating humans, dismissing them as relics of a bygone era. But Sable knew better. She knew what her people were capable of when backed into a corner. "What do you expect will happen to your colony?" the curator asked, its voice a hunted death knell. "That depends," Sable said, studying the alien with a gaze as sharp as a laser blade. "Are you asking as a friend or an accomplice in their demise?" The curator hesitated, a flicker of something close to uncertainty passing across its features. "Merely an observer." "Then observe this," Sable said, her voice low like the growl of a predator. "Underestimate humanity at your own risk." The curator's laughter echoed through the halls, a hollow sound that clashed with the silence of empty corridors. "We shall see, won't we?" Sable considered flipping it off but decided against it. She was on the clock, after all. No time for petty gestures when lives were on the line. Taking a deep breath, she glanced at the shining, alien metal walls that surrounded her, a prison masquerading as an institution. This, she thought, is where the game begins. It was a game of survival, a deadly dance of deceit and strategy, and she would see to it that humanity had the last laugh. As they reached the end of the tour, Sable caught sight of a familiar face, or rather, a familiar sneer. Vex, another human psychic soldier, leaned against the wall, his eyes twinkling with mischief and something darker. "Vex," she said, nodding. "Fancy meeting you in this cosmic dumpster fire." "Sable," he replied, his grin a sharp slice of white against the shadow of his scruff. "I hear we're the main attraction." "Seems like it," she sighed, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension coiled within. "You ready to put on a show?" Vex shrugged. "If it means giving these smug bastards a run for their money, count me in." "Good," Sable said, feeling a rush of grim satisfaction. "Because I think it's time we gave them a taste of real human culture." "With a side of rebellion," Vex added. "And a dash of psychic chaos," Sable finished. The curator, oblivious to their exchange, continued its monologue, moving deeper into what it likely thought was an audience of enthralled listeners, all the better for them. Sable and Vex shared a look, a silent agreement passing between them. They were outnumbered, sure. Outgunned, definitely. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning the tables. The universe wasn't ready for them, and by the time it was, it would be too late. "Let's make history," Sable whispered. "And then break it," Vex replied. With a nod, Sable led the way. The only weapons she needed were her wits and the quiet fury burning within. The Athicans wanted a spectacle, and she was more than willing to give them one. As they slipped into the shadows, Sable couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, ready to take on a galaxy of alien foes with a psychic sidekick and sarcasm as her shield. "Hey, Vex," she whispered. "Yeah, if we survive this, remind me to never take a museum tour again." Vex chuckled, his laughter a bright spark in the dark. "Deal." The Athicans thought they could play with human lives. But they were about to find out just how stubborn, how resilient, and how absolutely unpredictable humans could be. Or, as Sable liked to think, how much trouble they could cause when pushed to the edge. The game was on, and Sable Verret was ready. The museum, with all its artifice and alien grandeur, was about to become the stage for a very human brand of chaos. One that would echo through the stars, long after the last laugh had faded. As the darkness swallowed them, Sable felt the familiar warmth of defiance flood her veins. It was time to show the universe exactly what it meant to be human. Sable Verret had seen enough of the Interstellar Museum's exhibit on human culture to last several lifetimes. She had a sneaking suspicion that if she had to hear one more Athican curator wax poetic about the primitive charm of wooden chairs or the quaint functionality of doorknobs, she'd start seeing red. And not just because the lighting in this section of the museum was inexplicably awful. "Nice to see they've moved on from collecting rocks and sticks," Vex remarked, eyeing a display of what looked like ancient Earth kitchen appliances. "Though I suspect they think they've struck gold with this junk." "Half of this crap didn't even work on Earth," Sable replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But hey, one species' trash is another's treasure trove of misunderstanding." They paused at a display of a battered old refrigerator. The plaque read, "An artifact of human preservation methods." Sable let out a low chuckle as Vex shook his head. "It's a miracle we survived long enough to get into space at all," he said. "With technology like that, I'm surprised we didn't blow ourselves up trying to toast bread." "Don't count us out just yet," Sable replied, her tone sharper. The Athicans might be smug, but they were also predictable. Everyone knew that arrogance made for a pretty shoddy armor. As the curator prattled on about human reliance on fossil fuels, a flicker of movement caught Sable's eye. She nudged Vex, nodding toward a security door propped slightly ajar. "Looks like someone forgot to lock up," she said. "Care to sneak a peek?" "Why not?" Can't be any worse than the Athicans' artistic interpretations of Earth history. They slipped through the door, entering a dimly lit corridor that hummed with the low thrum of machinery, a stark contrast to the museum's polished facade. Sable's mind hummed, not just with the ambient energy of her psychic abilities, but with the growing conviction that whatever was behind these walls was the real reason she'd been sent here. "Feels like we're in the guts of this place," Vex noted, stepping over a coil of cables as they moved further into the corridor. "If I find a control room, I'm claiming the biggest screen." They continued on until they reached a room filled with monitors and consoles. The screens flickered with images of the colony, each one more unsettling than the last. Sable felt a prickling at the back of her neck, the telltale sign of something she didn't like. "Well, this is cozy," Vex said, leaning against a console as he scanned the monitors. "Looks like the Athicans are a bit more hands-on with our colony than they'd like us to believe." "Understatement of the year," Sable murmured, eyes narrowing at the screens. The footage revealed maintenance bots dismantling vital infrastructure, power grids being rerouted to who knew where, and Athican ships hovering like vultures over a carcass. "Looks like they're planning to dismantle more than just the colony," she said, a chill running down her spine. "It's a setup. They're letting it fall apart as a distraction. Damned bastards. Always about the bigger picture, isn't it?" Vex said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Never mind the thousands of lives caught in the crossfire." "It's worse than that," Sable said, her voice low. "They're playing the long game. This is a decoy to keep everyone's eyes off something bigger." She turned to Vex, her expression set into a grim determination that matched the fire in her eyes. "We need to let the others know. We can't let them get away with this." "Sure," Vex replied, crossing his arms with a wry smile. "Because organizing a rebellion from inside an alien museum sounds like a walk in the park." Sable punched him lightly on the shoulder. "You got a better idea, smartass." "Maybe," Vex said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "But it'll involve a lot of running, a good bit of luck, and probably some injuries along the way." "I'll take my chances," Sable said. "Let's rally the troops." Backtracking through the corridors, they moved with purpose, their footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. They needed to find the others, the small group of human psychic soldiers scattered throughout the museum under the pretense of being tourists. In a cramped utility room that smelled faintly of burnt wires, they found the first of their allies, a wiry woman with a shock of blue hair and a perpetual smirk. Jax was already waiting, her expression one of bored amusement. "About time you two showed up," she said, her voice a lazy drawl. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost in the gift shop. More like found a reason to crash this little shindig," Sable said, quickly filling her in on what they'd discovered. Jax's expression shifted from amusement to steely determination in the blink of an eye. "So," Jax said, cracking her knuckles, "when do we start making things go boom?" "Not yet," Sable replied, though the idea was tempting. "First, we need to get the others, then we figure out how to stop this disaster from happening." "Gotcha," Jax said with a nod. "I'll reach out to our people. You two keep stirring the pot." As they left Jax to her task, Sable felt the weight of what lay ahead settle over her shoulders. The Athicans had underestimated them, underestimated humanity's resolve and tenacity. That was their first mistake. "Hey, Sable," Vex said as they moved through the halls. "Think we can get this done without blowing ourselves up?" "Guess we'll find out," she replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. "But if we're going to go out, let's make sure it's with a bang." Their next stop was a gallery littered with relics from Earth's past. The place was deserted save for one figure, a tall man with an unmistakable air of authority, dressed as casually as anyone could be in a place like this. "Ruff," Sable called softly, and the man turned, giving her a nod. "Figured you'd be by eventually," Ruff said, his voice low but steady. "You two always did like to make an entrance." "We found something," Vex said, cutting to the chase. "The Athicans are using the colony as a distraction. Something bigger's going on." Ruff's eyes darkened, his posture stiffening. "And here I was hoping for a quiet day." "Sorry to disappoint," Sable said, though there was no real apology in her tone. "We need to rally everyone, get them ready." "Consider it done," Ruff replied, his voice laced with the kind of quiet resolve that made Sable glad he was on their side. "But we'll need more than psychic tricks. We're outnumbered, outgunned." "Which means we use what we've got," Sable said firmly. "Humans have faced worse odds before." With Ruff on board, they moved swiftly, gathering the rest of their scattered team. Each one brought their own unique skills, their own brand of human tenacity. There was something immensely comforting in that, Sable thought, as if they were on the brink of something important. In a museum storeroom piled high with cultural treasures, the ragtag group of human psychics gathered. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of old wood. "All right, folks," Sable said, addressing the group. "We've got a problem, and it's not just the Athicans' terrible taste in decor." The room stilled as she explained the situation, laying out the threat with grim efficiency. Faces turned from skeptical to serious, a shared understanding of what was at stake settling over them like a shroud. "So, we're going to kick their tentacled asses?" asked a young psychic with an overabundance of ambition and not nearly enough experience. "That's the plan," Sable replied. "But first we need to stop the colony from falling apart. We can't let them use our people as pawns." "How?" another asked, skepticism lacing their tone. "We're outnumbered, and let's be honest, they don't exactly roll out the red carpet for humans." "True," Sable conceded. "But we've got something they don't. We've got brains, guts, and a whole lot of determination." Vex stepped forward, his voice carrying the same determination. "We need to disrupt their operations, make them think twice about using our colony as a distraction." "And what about when they realize we're onto them?" Jax asked, her expression serious. "Then we show them what it means to underestimate humans," Ruff replied, his voice a low growl of defiance. Together they crafted a plan, a chaotic, insane, and utterly human plan. It was risky, sure, but it was the best shot they had. Each step was designed to throw a wrench into the Athicans' well-oiled machine, to expose their plans to the wider galaxy. As the group dispersed to prepare, Sable caught Vex's eye. "Think we've got a shot?" she asked, her voice quieter now, the bravado slipping for just a moment. Vex shrugged, but there was a glint of optimism in his eyes. "If anyone can pull off a miracle, it's us." Sable snorted, though she felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "That's the spirit. Let's show them what we're made of." As they moved out, Sable couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The Athicans wanted a show, a distraction from their real intentions, but they were about to get more than they'd bargained for. This was just the beginning, and if Sable had any say in it, the end would be very different from what the Athicans had planned. The universe may have ignored humanity for too long, but it was about to witness what humans could do when backed into a corner. And if there was one thing Sable knew for certain, it was this: when humans fought, they fought to win. Sable led her ragtag bunch of human rebels through the museum's labyrinthine corridors, feeling like a reluctant shepherd to a flock of disgruntled sheep. The Athicans had really outdone themselves with this place, she mused, stuffing their halls with enough human artifacts to make even the most sentimental earthling gag. Yet here they were, about to use those same relics as the staging ground for a coup. The irony was practically delicious. The group stopped in a gallery decorated with ancient Earth kitchen appliances, a bizarre homage to humanity's prowess at domesticating the kitchen. Sable glanced at the displays, silently cursing the Athicans' interpretation of culture. Refrigerators as symbols of preservation. More like testaments to mankind's laziness or ingenuity, depending on how one viewed the age of leftovers. "This is your big plan?" asked York, a tall, grumbling figure with a skeptical look that matched his equally skeptical mind. "We rally around the sacred toaster. Why not?" Sable shot back, her tone laced with dry humor. "Nothing says rebellion like breakfast." York snorted, but the discontent in the room was palpable. Doubts about their little operation bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. Vex, ever the tactician, sensed the tension and stepped in. "Hey, at least it's not a microwave," Vex said. "Those things are death traps." Jax, with her shock of blue hair and irreverent attitude, chimed in. "Yeah, you ever try to reheat pizza in one of those? It's a war crime." A few snickers rippled through the group, breaking some of the tension. Gallows humor, Sable thought, was a universal bomb. Still, humor could only go so far, and she needed more than jokes to keep this band together. "Look," Sable said, adopting her no-nonsense tone. "I get it. The Athicans outnumber us, and they've probably got more tentacles than we have limbs. But you've all seen what they are planning. You want to sit around and let them dismantle our colony piece by piece." A murmur of agreement spread through the room, but not everyone was convinced. A wiry man named Gage, as cynical as he was pragmatic, leaned against a display case housing a waffle iron. "And how do you propose we do that without getting turned into an interstellar pancake?" Gage asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Sable met his gaze evenly. "We hit them where it hurts," she replied. "We may not have numbers on our side, but we've got the element of surprise. They think we're just a bunch of harmless relics that bite back." "And if that doesn't work," York pressed, arms crossed defiantly. "Then we switch strategy," Sable said. "We're not here to throw ourselves at their mercy. We're here to make them rethink taking humanity for granted." Ruff, standing solid as a rock by the entrance, nodded. "Remember, folks, arrogance is a poor shield. The Athicans are wearing it like it's the latest fashion." Jax grinned, her smirk as sharp as a knife. "Plus, we're really good at making messes." "That's the spirit," Vex said, clapping her on the back. "Let's show them just how chaotic humans can be." The group, however reluctantly, seemed to come together around the idea. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. They were human, after all. Imperfection was practically their trademark. "All right then," Sable said, feeling the weight of leadership settle onto her shoulders once more. "We move fast, we hit hard, and we don't stop until they're running scared." As Sable detailed the plan, the rebels slowly transformed from a bunch of disgruntled individuals into something resembling a cohesive unit. They might have been a motley crew, but they were her motley crew, and she wouldn't trade them for all the Athican tech in the galaxy. York, Gage, Jax, and the others each took on roles, their skepticism slowly morphing into a cautious optimism. They had a shot, however slim, and they were ready to take it. "Remember," Sable said, wrapping up their impromptu strategy session, "we're the underdogs here. Nobody expects us to win. That's our advantage." "Underdogs," Jax chuckled, adjusting her gear. "I prefer to think of us as wolves in sheep's clothing." Sable smirked. "Then let's show those Athicans what happens when the sheep bite back." The plan was simple in its audacity. Disrupt the Athicans' operations by targeting their control centers scattered throughout the museum. While the Athicans busied themselves with the chaos, the rebels would seize the chance to expose the truth of the Athicans scheming to the rest of the galaxy. As they prepared to move out, Sable took a moment to mentally fortify herself. She could feel the eyes of her comrades on her, their faith in her leadership as fragile as the glass encasing the artifacts around them. But faith was a funny thing. It didn't require proof, just belief. And right now, belief was all they had. The group divided into smaller teams, each with its own target. Sable and Vex took the lead, their destination a communications hub buried deep within the museum's bowels. As they weaved through the corridors, Sable couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of their situation. Here they were, about to launch a rebellion in the most unlikely of places, armed with little more than conviction and a smattering of psychic abilities. "This is either going to work spectacularly well," Sable said as they navigated a series of narrow passageways, "or spectacularly disastrous." Vex chuckled, his usual wry humor intact despite the tension. "I'm betting on a bit of both." "I love a good disaster. Hope you've got your running shoes on," Sable replied. "We might need them." As they neared the communications hub, the air grew cooler, the temperature controlled to protect the sensitive equipment inside. The hum of machinery was a constant background noise, a reminder of the Athicans' omnipresence. "All right," Vex said, scanning the area. "What's the plan once we're inside?" "We disable their communications, disrupt their control of the colony's infrastructure," Sable replied. "Then we broadcast the truth. Let everyone see the Athicans for what they really are." "Easy as pie," Vex said, though his tone was anything but confident. "Hey, at least we're not trying to bake one," Sable replied, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Let's move." With a nod, they slipped through the door into the heart of the enemy's operations. The room was a stark contrast to the museum's exhibits, its walls lined with the latest in Athican technology. Each piece of equipment hummed with latent power, the air thick with the scent of metal and ozone. Sable's gaze swept over the consoles, each one displaying streams of data in alien script. She couldn't decipher the language, but she didn't need to. The screens showed enough, the colony's vital infrastructure, mapped and monitored in meticulous detail. "Looks like we're in the right place," Vex said, nodding toward a central console. "Shall we?" "Let's," Sable replied, moving to the console. She placed her hands on the controls, feeling the thrum of energy through her fingertips. Drawing on her psychic abilities, she reached into the machine systems, searching for the threads of data that connected it to the wider network. It was like reaching into a tangled web, each thread leading to another in a seemingly endless maze. "Got anything?" Vex asked, keeping a watchful eye on the room's entrance. "Working on it," Sable replied through gritted teeth, concentrating on the task at hand. Her mind brushed against the edges of the network, probing until she found the connection she needed. With a mental nudge, she severed the link, feeling the system shudder beneath her touch. The screens flickered, their displays shifting as if confused by the sudden disruption. "That should do it," Sable said, stepping back from the console. "Let's get the hell out of here before anyone realizes what we've done." They retreated into the corridors, the sound of alarms beginning to echo through the halls. Their handiwork had not gone unnoticed, and soon the Athicans would come running. But by then, it would be too late. As they made their way back to the rendezvous point, Sable couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. They'd taken the first step, however small, in reclaiming their fate from the hands of the Athicans. "Think they'll get the message?" Vex asked as they ran, his breath coming in steady bursts. "Oh, they'll get it," Sable replied, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. "And they'll wish they hadn't." With each step, the weight of doubt lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the thrill of rebellion. They were a long way from winning, but for the first time, it felt like victory was within reach. The museum, with all its relics and artifacts, might have been a testament to the past, but Sable and her crew were about to turn it into a monument to human defiance. And if the Athicans wanted a show, well, they were about to get one hell of a performance. The eerie calm of the museum was shattered by the blaring alarms, echoing through the corridors like a symphony of impending doom. Sable and Vex legged it, dodging past displays of ancient earth blenders and juicers as they made their exit. The Athicans had intensified security quicker than a caffeinated squirt, and it was only a matter of time before the tentacled curators came crawling out of their intellectual ivory towers. "Think they'll start charging us for running tours?" Vex quipped, barely missing a decorative meat grinder. "Please," Sable shot back. "They'd charge us for breathing if they could." Their footsteps echoed in the deserted hall, a rhythmic percussion that matched the frantic beating of their hearts. This place, with its human artifacts misunderstood and misvalued, was now a battlefield. And the Athicans weren't just curators anymore. They were jailers, tightening the noose around the human colony with every passing minute. Reaching the rendezvous point, they found York, Jax, and the others waiting, expressions a mix of anticipation and unease. Jax's blue hair seemed an even brighter beacon in the dim lighting, like a rebellious flag refusing to be lowered. York, ever the skeptical sentinel, raised an eyebrow. "So you did it, pulled the plug on their communications." Sable nodded, catching her breath. Cut the cord and watch their screens go haywire. The Athican equivalent of pulling the fire alarm at a posh dinner party. Jax grinned, the defiance in her eyes a mirror to Sable's own. Guess that means it's showtime. What's next, fearless leader? Next, Sable said, we use what little time we've bought to make our next move. They're going to be looking everywhere but where we need them to, and we have to take advantage of that. Not to rain on your parade, York interjected, but they are probably going to escalate security. They're not exactly going to sit around twiddling their tentacles. Sable shrugged. Well, if they up the ante, we do too. We've got a few tricks of our own, remember. Vex chimed in, his voice a mixture of annoyance and amusement. Yeah, like using our psychic abilities. Because nothing says surprise like messing with mind games. Psychic abilities, Gage muttered, rolling his eyes. Never thought I'd be relying on something that sounds like it belongs in a second-rate sci-fi novel. Hey, give us some credit, Jax said, mock indignantly. We're at least first-rate material, thank you very much. A ripple of laughter, albeit nervous, spread through the group. It was gallows humor, but it was theirs, and it was enough to keep them grounded amidst the chaos. Sable turned serious, glancing at each of them in turn. We're going to have to think on our feet. Adapt. They've got tech, but we've got something they don't. Reckless stupidity, Vex suggested. Ingenuity, Sable corrected, though the line between the two was admittedly thin. Their arrogance is their weakness. They underestimate us, and that's how we're going to win. York grunted. Sure, but how do we turn a toaster into a weapon of mass destruction? Because I'm fresh out of ideas. Don't underestimate the power of burnt toast, Jax said, deadpan. It worked on my brother back home. Look, Sable interrupted before the conversation descended into a debate about breakfast appliances. We need to be unpredictable. We know they're going to crack down hard, so let's use that to our advantage. She paused, letting her words settle. They didn't have a full arsenal of weapons at their disposal, but what they did have was a will to fight and the element of surprise. That and a museum full of misunderstood human technology. Think about it, she continued. They're watching us, but they don't really understand us. We use that. Misdirection, guerrilla tactics, the works. We'll make their surveillance work against them. Vex nodded, catching on. Psychic interference, too. We can mess with their sensors, feed them false data. Exactly, Sable said, encouraged by his quick grasp of the plan. We keep them guessing. We're not fighting their fight. We make them fight ours. York crossed his arms, thoughtful, so we become ghosts. Hit and run, make them question their own systems. Sable smiled. Now you're getting it. For a moment, the room was charged with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just rebels in a museum. They were an unpredictable force, ready to turn the tables on their oppressors. As they discussed the finer points of their plan, Sable couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship with her ragtag team. Sure, they were a bunch of misfits armed with no more than grit and a few psychic tricks, but they were hers, and they were going to make the Athicans regret ever underestimating humanity. The first step was to disrupt the Athican patrol schedules. If the aliens were going to increase their presence, then Sable's group needed to make them spread out even more. They couldn't be everywhere at once, and this was something the rebels planned to exploit. We're going to need distractions, Vex said, outlining parts of the museum where they could easily divert attention. A few misfires in their security system should do the trick, and how do we pull that off? Gage asked, skepticism thick in his voice. By making them see things that aren't there, Sable replied. Psychic echoes. We can project false images, make it seem like we're in two places at once. Or three, Jax added with a mischievous grin. I've always wanted to be in more than one place simultaneously. It'll make me feel far more important than I actually am. York shook his head, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. You'd think with all that power, we'd have found a way to make coffee without a machine. Priorities, York, Vex chuckled. We'll save the coffee rebellion for another day. With their plan set, the group moved swiftly, each member keenly aware of the risks but fueled by the possibility of success. Sable watched them go, feeling a mix of anxiety and fierce pride. They were walking into a storm, but for the first time, she felt like they had a fighting chance. As night fell, or at least as close to night as one could get inside a museum, perpetually lit by artificial lights, Sable and her crew began their operation. They slipped through the corridors, shadows against the backdrop of human history encased in glass. Jax was the first to deploy her psychic abilities, sending out a projection that mimicked the group's presence near the eastern wing. It was a carefully crafted illusion, designed to draw the Athicans away from their true objective. "They're biting," Vex reported, his fingers resting lightly on a handheld scanner. "Sensors are picking up movement." "They're redirecting their forces." "Perfect," Sable murmured, focusing on maintaining the illusion. Her mind stretched, touching upon the psychic energies that pulsed beneath the surface. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, like walking a tightrope with no safety net. The Athicans, predictably, took the bait. The sound of their rushed movements, the clattering of alien limbs against the museum floor, was music to the rebels' ears. Sable could almost imagine the look of frustration on the Athican curator's face, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of underestimation. As the Athicans converged on the eastern wing, Sable's group slipped past their defenses, heading towards the control room where they planned to further disrupt the alien systems. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, a labyrinth of human history waiting for them to carve their own legend into its walls. "Remind me to thank the Athicans for designing this place like a maze," York whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. "Let's send them a fruit basket," Jax suggested, "or a box of exploding chocolates." They reached the control room without incident, a testament to their plan and the Athicans' overconfidence. The room was a hive of technological interfaces, alien script dancing across screens like an indecipherable ballet. "Okay," Sable said, rolling up her sleeves. "Time to make some noise." Vex and Jax joined her at the central console, their combined psychic abilities probing into the system's heart. It was a delicate dance, their minds weaving through the network to plant seeds of chaos and confusion. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and in the midst of it all, Sable's group moved like a well-rehearsed symphony. As they worked, Sable felt a strange sense of empowerment. Here, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, they were crafting a narrative of defiance, a story of rebellion that would echo through the museum long after the dust had settled. "Think they'll write a song about us?" Jax mused, her voice light despite the strain of maintaining the psychic interference. Vex chuckled. "If they do, I hope it's not in Athican. I'd hate to hear their version of a ballad." Sable smiled, her heart swelling with a fierce pride. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their depth, but they were human. And if history had taught them anything, it was that underestimating humanity was a mistake countless empires had made before. "Okay, team," Sable said as they finished their work. "Time to disappear before the real fun starts." With the Athicans scrambling to contain the chaos, Sable and her crew retreated, their mission accomplished for the moment. They'd struck a blow, small but significant, against their oppressors. And they'd done it with nothing more than their wits, their abilities, and a museum full of misunderstood relics. As they made their way back to the rendezvous point, Sable felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to be heard, to be seen, to be free. And for the first time, it felt like they might actually have a chance. York, walking beside her, voiced what they were all thinking. "You know, Sable, if we pull this off, we might just go down in history." Sable smirked, the weight of leadership settling comfortably on her shoulders. "Yeah, and with any luck, we'll be the ones riding it." The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But they had taken the first step, and sometimes that's all it takes to start a revolution. The museum had never been intended as a fortress, but here they were, barricading themselves with glass cases full of ancient Earth relics, essentially playing house with humanity's forgotten past. The Athican curator probably never anticipated his precious exhibits would double as makeshift barricades. But then again, War and irony often went hand in hand. Sable adjusted her position behind a display case labeled "The Age of Appliances," a subtitle she found both ludicrous and depressingly accurate given their current circumstances. Her group had managed one successful hit-and run, but now the stakes were higher. Their previous stunt had agitated the Athicans, and they were done playing nice or pretending to understand human culture. The curator's voice crackled over the intercom, a grating blend of condescension and superiority. "Consider surrender, humans. Your resistance is a futile exercise in misguided bravado." Vex smirked. "He sounds like a used vacuum salesman." Sable couldn't help but laugh, albeit humorlessly. "Yeah, except he's selling oppression and we're the ones getting suckered." She glanced around at her team, noting the strain in their eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving room for doubt and fatigue to creep in. They were still standing, but for how long? York was pacing, his footsteps heavy with frustration. "We can't keep this up, Sable. We need a new angle or we're toast." "Good thing we're surrounded by toasters then," Jax chimed in, though her usual bravado seemed more forced today. The weight of their situation was pressing down, and even sarcasm had its limits. Sable knew York was right, but admitting it felt like capitulating. They'd come this far on sheer determination and a healthy dose of recklessness. Wasn't that supposed to count for something? Their moment of introspection was interrupted by a dull boom that reverberated through the museum, shaking the walls and dislodging a few precariously balanced artifacts. The Athicans were escalating, and subtlety wasn't on the menu. "That sounded expensive," Vex noted dryly as he peered around the edge of their barricade. "Expensive and explosive." "Two of my least favorite things," Sable replied, her mind racing for a plan. The Athicans had cut through their distractions quicker than anticipated. The group's earlier high was evaporating, replaced with the cold reality of their predicament. The museum's layout had been their ally, but the Athicans were adapting, and Sable feared that soon there'd be nowhere left to run. A sudden tension in the room pulled Sable from her thoughts. York had stopped pacing and was staring at something on the ground. A small, blinking device sat innocuously by his feet, an Athican tracker, one of the more insidious pieces of tech they'd managed to engineer. "Guys," York said, his voice low and edged with a kind of despair that sent a chill down Sable's spine. "We've got a problem." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. They'd been betrayed. Someone had given away their position, a nasty revelation that turned their solidarity into suspicion. Sable met York's gaze, seeing her own fear reflected back. "How the hell did that get here?" Vex looked around, suspicion sharpening his features. "Can't be a coincidence," he growled. "Someone's helping them." "Great," Jax added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "As if this wasn't hard enough, now we've got a mole." "Perfect." Sable's mind raced, scanning through recent events, interactions, any sign she might have missed. There was no time for a thorough investigation, but they couldn't ignore it either. "All right," Sable began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "We can't turn on each other now. It's probably exactly what they want us to do. We need to focus on moving and fast." "And where do you suggest we move to?" York asked, arms crossed as he tried to mask his frustration with indifference. "The last safe spot in this museum." Vex glanced at the overturned exhibit cases and the mockingly cheerful "Welcome to the History of Sound" sign above them. "How about the music wing? I hear good acoustics are just what a rebellion needs." Sable shook her head, a half-smile ghosting her lips. Even in the dire straits, Vex could crack a joke. It was a talent she both admired and envied. "Let's make it work," she said. "We need to keep them guessing, change our rhythm, make them dance to our tune for once." The group gathered their gear, moving with a renewed urgency. As they navigated through the dimly lit corridors, Sable felt the weight of leadership pressing heavily on her. Trust was a fragile thing, and under the constant pressure of survival, it was fraying at the edges. They reached the music wing, a cavernous hall filled with instruments from across the ages. It should have felt like a sanctuary, but instead, it felt like a stage for their last stand. Well, at least we'll go out with a bang, Jack said, eyeing a particularly grandiose drum set that dominated the center of the room. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Sable replied, though she appreciated the attempt at levity. We still have a few cards to play. York was already assessing the room for defensive advantages, his pragmatic mind looking for any edge. We can use the instruments to set up a few traps. If nothing else, it'll buy us time. As they worked, Sable couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal gnawing at her. Someone had led the Athicans right to them, and if they survived this, finding that person was going to be her top priority. But for now, survival was all that mattered. They couldn't afford the luxury of trust issues when their very existence was on the line. The familiar hum of Athican technology grew louder, a reminder that their time was running out. The aliens were close, their confidence bolstered by the knowledge that the humans were on the ropes. Sable positioned herself near the entrance, the others taking up strategic positions around the room. The instruments were arranged in a chaotic symphony, a last-ditch effort to create confusion and chaos. "Ready?" Sable asked, though the question was more rhetorical than anything. They didn't have the luxury of readiness, only necessity. Vex nodded, a grim determination in his eyes. "Let's make some noise." The Athicans breached the room with the subtlety of a wrecking ball, their arrogance a palpable force. They moved with a precision born of overconfidence, assuming their superiority would carry the day. But they hadn't matched wits with Sable and her crew before. As the first alien crossed the threshold, a cacophony erupted, a discordant blend of sounds as Sable's team set off their improvised traps. Cymbals clashed, strings twanged, and drums reverberated, creating an audio assault that echoed through the hall. The Athicans hesitated, their senses momentarily overwhelmed by the unexpected barrage. It wasn't a victory, but it bought them precious seconds. "Now!" Sable shouted, leading the charge as they pushed back against their oppressors. It was desperate, it was reckless, and it was quintessentially human. The museum became a battleground once more, a clash of wills where every second mattered. Instruments became weapons, and sound became a shield as Sable's group fought to reclaim the scraps of dignity the Athicans had tried to steal. In the fray, Sable caught sight of the Athican curator, his elegant robes a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and disdain, a mirror of the arrogance that had led his people to underestimate them. Sable grinned fiercely, her defiance burning bright even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Enjoying the show," she called out, her voice cutting through the din. The curator's eyes narrowed, his reply lost in the noise. But Sable didn't need to hear it. She saw the frustration etched into his alien features, the cracks forming in his once impervious facade. The fight raged on, the air thick with the acridity of desperation and the metallic taste of defiance. Sable's crew was outmatched, but they fought with a tenacity that belied their numbers. They couldn't match the Athicans in technology or resources, but they'd be damned if they didn't give them a run for their money. As the battle reached its crescendo, Sable knew they couldn't hold out forever. Their energy was waning, their bodies bruised and battered. But they'd made their mark, a reminder to the Athicans and perhaps to themselves that humanity was far from finished. With a final, defiant push, Sable and her crew retreated, blending into the shadows of the museum once more. It was a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. They'd lived to fight another day, and that was enough for now. As they regrouped in a quieter corner of the museum, Sable surveyed her team. They were exhausted, the adrenaline ebbing away to reveal the toll of their efforts. But they were alive, and that was something. York caught her eye, his expression a mixture of respect and weariness. "You've got a knack for making a mess, Sable," she laughed, a genuine sound amidst the chaos. "It's a gift." The laughter was infectious, spreading through the group until they were all chuckling, the sound a balm to their frayed nerves. They were battered and bruised, but they were still standing. As they settled in to catch their breath, Sable felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but they'd proven something today. They were more than just a footnote in the Athicans' grand narrative. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they weren't going anywhere. With any luck, they'd find the traitor in their midst and turn the tide in their favor. But that was a problem for tomorrow. For now, they were survivors, and that was enough. The museum's gloomy corridors closed in on them like a noose, the air thick with the scent of dust and despair, though that could just be the smell of Vex after a hard day's rebellion. Well, that was exhilarating, Vex muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grime behind. Nothing like a good old-fashioned alien ass-kicking to get the blood pumping. York snorted, leaning against a display case housing a once precious relic, a waffle iron if the label was to be believed. Yeah, because getting shot at by space squids is everyone's idea of a fun Saturday night. Sable shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. It beats watching reruns of Galactic Kitchen Nightmares, though. Her voice carried a note of defiance, a spark of hope that had been missing just moments before. Somewhere in the chaos she had felt something, a connection, an idea sparking to life like a match struck in the dark. "All right, team," Sable clapped her hands, drawing the group's attention. "We've been on the back foot too long. It's time we change the game." Jax raised an eyebrow, adjusting the strap on her makeshift armor, an ensemble consisting of ancient astronaut memorabilia and a very stubbornly attached colander. "Got a plan, do you?" "I'd love to hear how we turn kitchen appliances into weapons of mass destruction." "Funny you should say that," Sable replied, her eyes alight with a new, unsettling kind of determination. She gestured to the exhibits surrounding them, each a testament to humanity's baffling genius. "These aren't just relics. They're tools, symbols. The Athicans underestimate them, underestimate us." "Let's use that." Vex chuckled darkly, nodding in agreement. "You want to make the Athicans regret their little jaunt to IKEA, don't you?" "Exactly," Sable said, the kernel of a plan forming in her mind. "We tap into the psychic network, the one the Athicans think is just background noise. We amplify it using their own tech, turn their communications against them." York scratched his head, skepticism etched into his features. "Psychic network. When did we start believing in ghost stories?" "It's not a ghost story," Sable insisted. "It's real, and it's right under their noses. The Athicans don't see it because they are looking at everything through their own lens, not ours, but we can tap into it. We can use it." Jax considered this, the glint of a dangerous idea forming in her eyes. "You're saying we can give them a taste of their own medicine. I like the sound of that." The group exchanged glances, the possibility of triumph whispering sweetly in their ears. It was a long shot, sure, a wild, reckless gamble with stakes sky high, but what choice did they have? The odds were already stacked against them, and they sure as hell weren't going to win by playing it safe. "We'll need to split up," Sable continued, outlining the plan with swift strokes. "Vex, you and York will gather whatever tech you can find. Jax, you're with me. We'll need to access the main Athican hub. It's risky, but it's the only way." Vex nodded, his usual sarcasm giving way to grim determination. "Time to channel my inner kleptomaniac, then." York sighed, a resigned look on his face. "And I'll be his unwilling accomplice. Again." With their roles defined, the group sprang into action, urgency propelling them forward. The museum was a labyrinth of forgotten history and discarded dreams, each corner hiding potential salvation or disaster. As they moved, Sable felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her, a reminder of how quickly hope could turn to despair. "How are we going to hijack the psychic network?" Jax asked as they made their way through the winding corridors, her voice low and cautious. "You got a magic wand I don't know about?" Sable chuckled, shaking her head. "No wand, just a hunch. The Athicans are all about tech, right? But they don't understand the human mind, the way we connect with each other. That's something we've got they don't. We just need to amplify it." Jax grinned, the idea catching fire in her mind. "Think we can pull off a psychic flash mob? That'd be something to see." "Wouldn't it just?" Sable agreed, feeling the thrill of the impossible under her skin. We just have to make enough noise that they can't ignore us anymore. They reached the heart of the museum, the main exhibit hall where the grandeur of humanity's achievements and its follies were laid bare. It was a place meant for inspiration, now serving as their battleground. Vex and York had already started assembling a mishmash of tech, the room a chaotic blend of wires, screens, and antique oddities that somehow seemed to belong together. "It's like the universe's most dysfunctional band is about to perform," York commented, shaking his head at the mess. "Focus, York," Sable said, though amusement danced in her eyes. "We're making history here." One way or another, the group worked in silence, the only sound the hum of equipment and the occasional muttered curse as they struggled with the alien tech. The air was heavy with anticipation, each of them acutely aware of the stakes, the fine line they walked between victory and oblivion. Jax leaned closer to the control panel they'd rigged from parts scavenged from various Athican gadgets. "How sure are we that this is gonna work? I don't fancy getting my brain fried because we decided to go all X-Men on them." "Not sure at all," Sable admitted, her hands moving deftly over the controls. "But I've got a feeling, and right now that's all we've got." Vex looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Well, if we're going out, at least we're doing it with style. And a complete lack of sanity. There's a thin line between genius and insanity," Sable replied with a shrug. "We're just choosing to ignore it." York finished his adjustments with a decisive nod. "All right, we're set." "Now what?" "Now," Sable said, taking a deep breath. "We give them a show they'll never forget." With a flick of a switch, the room lit up with a kaleidoscope of colors, the psychic network humming to life as they tapped into its latent power. The air crackled with energy, a strange, alien warmth that seeped into their bones. Jax let out a low whistle, clearly impressed against her better judgment. "Damn, Sable. If we survive this, you're buying the first round." "Deal," Sable replied, her voice resolute. "Let's show them what it means to be human." As the psychic web expanded, touching minds across the museum and beyond, the Athicans outside froze, their arrogance replaced by confusion. The humans were more than their primitive tools, more than mere curiosities in a museum. They were a force, unexpected and unyielding. The Athican curator, hovering near the edge of the commotion, watched the chaos unfold, his earlier disdain replaced by a dawning realization. The humans were unpredictable, their spirit a wild, uncontainable thing. He understood then, in a way he never had before, the weight of their defiance. Inside the museum, Sable and her team felt the connection deepen, a shared consciousness binding them together, giving them strength. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had turned the tide. They had found a way to make the Athicans listen, to take back their narrative. As the power surged around them, Vex grinned, a feral, triumphant smile. "Well, this is a hell of a thing. Who knew rebellion could be so colorful?" Sable laughed, her heart light despite the storm raging around them. "Let's keep them guessing. We've got a story to rewrite." The battle was far from over, the outcome uncertain. But for the first time they had hope, a fragile, precious thread that bound them together, weaving a new future from the ashes of the past. And that, Sable thought, was worth fighting for. The museum, now a makeshift war zone, hummed with the energy of impending action and desperation. The psychic network's aura fizzed and crackled like a cheap neon sign in a rundown part of town, and Sable was at the helm, steering their ragtag rebellion through this maelstrom of insanity. The Athican curator, who up until now thought himself the smartest squid in the pond, was about to get a crash course in human ingenuity, and probably a few bruises for good measure. "All right, team," Sable said, her voice sliced through the tension. She was the anchor in this storm of chaos, holding them together with sheer force of will. "Time to put on our big girl boots and show these aliens why you don't mess with Homo sapiens and their appliances." Jax adjusted her colander helmet, a symbol of bizarre defiance. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" "We going to beat them to death with toasters?" "Not quite," Sable replied, a sardonic glint in her eye. "Though that's plan B. We're going to overload the psychic network, blow their circuits, and make sure they remember not to underestimate the species that invented reality TV. Vex snorted, fiddling with a piece of jury-rigged Athican tech. Nothing strikes fear into the hearts of aliens like a marathon of keeping up with the Kardashians. York, leaning against a stack of rusting Earth kitchen relics, rolled his eyes. Please, Vex, we're trying to save the colony, not torture them into surrender. Sable clapped her hands, pulling their focus back. Okay, less banter, more action. Vex, you and York take the left flank. Jax and I'll take the right. We're going to hit them hard and fast, like a caffeine overdose. The goal is to make them pull back, give us enough breathing room to hijack their comms. Vex and York exchanged a knowing glance, a silent acknowledgement of the craziness they were about to dive into. Well, I always knew my life would end in a blaze of glory or stupidity, Vex said with a dark chuckle. Guess today's a 2-for-1 deal. Let's make sure it's glorious, York replied, smirking, or at least memorable enough that the survivors build a statue of us or something. The team split, moving through the museum's corridors with practiced efficiency. The Athicans might have underestimated them, but Sable's ragged army was nothing if not resourceful. Each step was a reminder of the stakes, the thin line between daring and despair. The main hall loomed ahead, the grand display of human history now a backdrop for their last stand. The Athicans, with their haughty tentacles and misplaced superiority, lined the perimeter, preparing to squash this human annoyance once and for all. Sable glanced at Jax, who looked like she was about to charge into a kitchen-themed gladiator match. Ready to make some noise? Sable asked, her voice laced with adrenaline. Jax nodded, her grin feral. Ready to turn this place into a symphony of chaos. With a shared nod, they charged. The Athicans weren't expecting it. Hell, they never thought humans capable of more than barking like irritating dogs. But Sable's team wasn't just barking. They were biting. Hard. The psychic network buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, and Sable's mind latched onto the hum, amplifying the discordant song of defiance. The Athicans faltered, their sleek technology buckling under the strain of human willpower and insanity. As they pushed forward, Jax swung a repurposed toaster like a medieval mace. Who knew breakfast appliances held such promise? She yelled, her voice a mix of humor and battle cries. And they said the kitchen was the woman's domain, Sable quipped, ducking behind a display case as bolts of alien energy sizzled past. York and Vex were a whirl of motion on the opposite side, using whatever they could grab, a blender, a metal spatula, even a particularly robust egg beater, to fend off the Athican advance. It was absurd, ridiculous, and yet somehow working. York let out a bark of laughter as an Athican stumbled back, tentacles flailing. Note to self: never underestimate the power of poorly designed kitchen gadgets. The fight surged and ebbed like a stormy sea, and for every step back the humans gained 2 forward. Sable's team was relentless, driven by their shared resolve and the echo of 1,000 human stories that had come before. Stories of endurance, rebellion, and sheer bloody-mindedness. As the tide began to turn, Sable felt the psychic network pulse, a rhythmic heartbeat that synchronized with theirs, accelerating, demanding action. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The Athican shield was cracking, their confidence unraveling like cheap yarn. Sable, Vex shouted across the chaos, his voice barely carrying over the din. I think it's working. Sable nodded, her focus split between keeping the network stable and not getting skewered by alien death rays. Keep pushing. Let's make sure they regret this little field trip to Earth's attic. Jax was in her element, swinging her colander-helmeted head like a battering ram. Once we're done, these bastards will be having nightmares about kitchen appliances. The Athicans, for all their superior tech and smugness, were on the back foot. They hadn't expected a fight, let alone one fought with such reckless abandon. Sable's team had become more than just defenders of a dusty museum. They were the bearers of a message, a declaration of humanity's infuriating knack for survival. The curator, watching from a safe distance, was a picture of flustered disbelief. His precious exhibits, once symbols of his triumph over a primitive culture, were now instruments of that culture's defiance. It was a bitter pill, and he looked like he just swallowed a whole bottle. As the humans pressed their advantage, the curator realized too late the truth that lay at the heart of the human spirit. Never underestimate those with nothing left to lose. The battle unfolded in a crescendo of chaos, the humans a whirlwind of unexpected fury. Sable and her team were everywhere and nowhere, a blur of movement and defiance that overwhelmed the Athicans' superior numbers. In the end, it wasn't just about humanity's survival. It was about sending a message loud enough to echo across the stars, a message that humans were not to be trifled with, that their resilience was as vast as space itself. The museum, for all its dust and misplaced exhibits, had become a testament not to humanity's past, but to its future. As the last of the Athicans retreated, their arrogance shattered, Sable's team stood victorious, a motley crew of rebels who had defied the odds and claimed their own narrative. The air was thick with the scent of burnt circuitry and triumph. Vex, breathless and grinning, approached Sable. "Well, I'll be damned. We actually pulled it off." Sable chuckled, her voice edged with exhaustion and relief. "Never doubted it for a second." York, leaning against a fridge like it was the most normal thing in the universe, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Because I distinctly remember you saying, and I quote, 'This is madness, but what the hell?'" Laughing, Sable shrugged. "Okay, maybe I doubted it a little." Jax joined them, her colander helmet askew but her eyes bright with victory. "So, what's next?" "We going to set up a new government based on kitchen appliance hierarchy. First things first," Sable said, taking in her team, their shared bond stronger than ever. "I owe you all a drink. After that, who knows, maybe we'll take this show on the road. Show the universe what a toaster revolution looks like." With the Athican threat driven off and their colony safe for now, the museum stood as a monument to their defiance, a place where the line had been drawn and held. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about reshaping the narrative into one where humans were more than just curiosities. They were survivors, rebels, and above all, they were free. As they made their way through the now quiet halls, Sable felt a surge of pride. The fight was far from over, but they had shown the universe that humanity was not to be forgotten, not to be written off. They had carved out a new chapter, one filled with humor, resilience, and a touch of insanity. And with that, Sable knew they would face whatever came next, together, ready to rewrite the stars themselves if need be. The museum, now a battlefield-turned-thrift store, loomed behind Sable as she surveyed the aftermath with the sort of satisfaction one might feel after finally fixing a decades-old leaky faucet. Broken pieces of alien tech and human appliance relics littered the floor, a testament to creativity and desperation. The Athicans, once smug in their superiority, were now nursing wounded pride and various bruises, courtesy of an impromptu lesson in human tenacity. The curator, a mass of tentacles and mortified disbelief, had been left to ponder the museum's latest edition, a grand exhibit on How Not to Underestimate Humanity 101. He was probably drafting a new entry for the Interstellar Encyclopedia under unexpected defiance. Sable imagined it would sit nicely between universal disappointments and things that should have been obvious. "Didn't think we'd actually pull it off," Vex said, plopping down next. He looked at her, a mix of disbelief and newfound respect in his eyes. "I mean, seriously, I was banking on us ending up as an interesting footnote in alien history." "Footnotes are for losers," Sable replied, flashing a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and triumph. "We're rewriting the whole damn chapter. Does this mean we're going to have to do paperwork?" York chimed in, rubbing his shoulder like an old man reminiscing about the good old days of not being shot at by aliens. "Because I didn't sign up for paperwork." "Relax, York. There's no paperwork in anarchy," Jax quipped, adjusting her colander helmet like it was a crown. Or at least none that we'd actually care about. Sable leaned back, taking in the impromptu gathering of rebels-turned-heroes, the museum their throne room of chaos and victory. You guys did good. Real good. But we're not done. This was just the appetizer, and I doubt the Athicans are going to sit back and let us have dessert. Yeah, I'm thinking they're not the forgiving type, Vex commented. More they erase your entire species from history type. Exactly, Sable agreed. Which is why we need to stay sharp. We've stirred the pot and now we've got to be ready for whatever comes out. Jax, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of battle, tapped her helmet. So, what's the next move, Chief? Sable paused, considering. First, we need to secure this place, make sure we're not sitting ducks. Then, we need to figure out how to use this victory to our advantage. Prove that humans aren't just a bunch of primitives with a knack for bad reality TV. The Kardashians will thank us for our service, York added dryly. And by thank us, I mean they'll probably sue us for defamation. Laughter rippled through the group, a release of tension that had been building since the moment they'd decided to take a stand. It was absurd, all of it, but that was humanity for you, turning the absurd into the possible, laughing in the face of the impossible. As the rebels began to clear the debris and assess their spoils, Sable took a moment to reflect. They'd done the impossible, yes, but the universe was a vast, uncaring place. The Athicans were just one enemy in a galaxy full of them. Still, there was something gratifying about seeing the curator's face when his precious exhibits became instruments of rebellion. She imagined that somewhere out there, some Athican scholar was furiously scribbling notes on the unpredictability of humans, cursing the day they'd decided to put Earth stuff in a museum. Maybe they'd even do a study on it, the erratic human, a case study in how not to handle cultural artifacts. With the museum secured, at least for the moment, Sable gathered her crew in the main hall. It was time for a debrief, human style, which meant plenty of sarcasm, a few drinks, and enough gallows humor to fill a black hole. All right, listen up, Sable called out, gathering her ragtag band of rebels around her. We've done the impossible and now we're standing on a mountain of alien defeat. But let's not get cocky. This isn't over. York raised a hand, feigning confusion. So, does this mean we're heroes or just really annoying pests? Probably a bit of both, Sable replied. But I'd rather be an annoying pest than a forgotten casualty. Jax, still wearing her colander helmet like a badge of honor, grinned. I say we make sure they never forget us. Turn this little victory into something bigger, agreed, Vex added. We've shown them that humanity isn't just about bad TV and mediocre music. We're survivors. And we've got a hell of a sense of humor, right? Sable said, nodding. So let's keep it up. Keep them guessing, keep them on their toes, and most importantly, keep ourselves alive. The rebels nodded, their spirits lifted by the promise of more chaos to come. They were a family now, bound by more than just their shared rebellion. They were united by a common cause, a shared defiance against a universe that thought it had them figured out. As the makeshift meeting broke up, Sable lingered, watching her team disperse to their various tasks. Each one of them had come to the rebellion for different reasons, some for revenge, some for justice, and some just for the hell of it. But now they were fighting for something more. They were fighting for each other, for the right to be more than just a footnote in someone else's history. Perhaps the Athicans would return, their pride demanding retribution. Perhaps other alien races would take notice, deciding that humanity needed to be put in its place. But for now, the rebels had carved out a small victory, and they intended to savor every moment. Sable turned to Jax, who was busy inspecting her makeshift helmet. Think we've got a shot at making peace with those tentacled bastards? Jax shrugged, her eyes glinting with mischief. Maybe. Or maybe we'll just keep driving them crazy until they give up and leave us alone. Sounds like a plan, Sable said, smiling. If there's one thing humans are good at, it's making life difficult for anyone who tries to mess with us. Here's to more of that, Vex said, raising an imaginary glass. to human ingenuity and the power of unconventional warfare, York, ever the skeptic, added, and to not getting vaporized in the process. With a shared laugh, the rebels dispersed, their footsteps echoing through the museum's hallowed halls. The fight was far from over, but they'd taken a stand and shown the universe that humanity wasn't going quietly into the night. Sable sat back, watching her team with a mixture of pride and determination. They'd come a long way, but there were still miles to go before they could rest. The universe was a big place, full of dangers and opportunities alike. But now, thanks to their victory, they had a chance to carve out a space for themselves, a place where they could be more than just relics in someone else's collection. As the day wore on and the rebels continued their work, Sable felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd won a battle, but the war was still raging. And as long as there was a fight to be had, they would keep moving forward, driven by the promise of a future where humanity wasn't just a punchline. In the quiet moments between tasks, Sable found herself thinking back to Earth, to the stories that had shaped her and her crew. They were tales of survival and triumph, of laughter and loss. And now they were adding their own chapters to that story, one defiant act at a time. With a final glance at her team, Sable stood and headed back into the fray, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. Together, they would forge a new path, one marked by the resilience and humor that had brought them this far. And as long as they had each other, Sable knew they could face anything.